Welcome to this session 6, the last session in this parenting series. In this session, we're going to wrap up by looking at attachment and some of the defenses, again, around attachment. We're going to start by looking at the dominant child. How does this happen? So, a child, as we saw in the last session, is normally moved to depend. They're cued by their felt need, and they come to depend on the providing adult. But if the dependent child is cued by their felt need and doesn't find a providing adult, then that child becomes dominant. They take things into their own hands. And so they become bossy and assertive, descriptive, controlling. They insist on fairness. They insist on getting what is deserved. And they hold the parent responsible. And they feel angry because things aren't working for them. Now, the providing adult is not moved. They're not assuming the dependent posture themselves.
Why does that happen?
Perhaps the parent is very anxious and they're unsure of how to care for the child. Or they're still carrying a bit of immaturity themselves and haven't individuated. Or maybe they've not been given a good example and have lost their intuition about how to raise that child. Or simply they're unavailable. They don't have the support that they need, and they're consumed by all the work just to provide for the family needs.
In this case, the child's still acting out of their instincts,
Yes,
but the adult isn't.
correct.
That instinct to provide is not being evoked in them.
It's not been evoked. And so, yes, this interaction is confusing, it's highly frustrating, it's exhausting, and ultimately unfulfilling
For both.
for both. The other situation where a child is moved from dependent to dominant is when you have a dominant adult. When you have an adult that's fueled by their own needs, they become bossy, where the adult is prescriptive and controlling and can't let go. So this is very similar to the child. The child needs their needs met, and then the adult is coming saying, no, you've got to meet my needs. And
It's fascinating. Both sides of the chart are the same.
mm-hmm.
So you have two dominant instincts coming together.
Yeah.
Now, these are both instincts again.
Yes, they're both instincts. So you can see the conflict that arises from this.
Mm-hmm.
And both parties are highly aggressive. They're relentless. It's hard to please. And there's this striving to be taken care of.
Now, what might create this in the adult?
The dominant child grows to be a dominant adult.
Okay.
And so they are always cued by their own felt needs and taking care of themselves.
So in essence, they've never really grown up.
They haven't.
Yeah.
Now, some of the challenges for the dominant child is they'll be competitive, they'll be demanding and bossy. These instincts to dominate seem self-evident to them because of the hurt and pain that they carry. We see them looking for the rewards, looking for the being first, the being the best, to always be in charge, to being the biggest, to being the strongest.
And all of that because they're taking care of themselves.
Yes.
And as we say here, they're often misperceived as strong and independent.
Yeah.
Like these can be very successful kids.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at kind of the exterior, they're independent because, well, they've got to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're competitive, which can take them far in school and sports and other activities. So if we don't know what's under the surface, can be quite confused by this.
Mm-hmm. And we can often see hints of it because the child has to always be right. They'll even perceive that they can do things that they really can't, like, I can take care of others.
We had a young child we knew who fit this profile of a fairly dominant child, was, great kid, socially very outgoing, very independent, but he really was very competitive, and he thought he was the answer to a lot of things. And so he was actually in between ages of our two children, and he once offered to babysit our kids, even though he was younger than one of them. He's like, well, I can babysit your kids. And I'm like, well, you're only 8. And, you aren't good at that. That's not your responsibility. So and in other things too, he thought he was a great swimmer. He didn't know how to swim, but he would have set out across the river and thought, yes, I can do this. I can do anything.
Yep. Yep. So not aware of his own abilities.
Right. And when he would talk about school, he was always the best in sports, in math, in every subject. He was the best. And I remember asking him once, I'm like, in your whole class? And he was like, oh yeah, at least maybe, maybe even the whole school. Like his view of himself was very, very high.
Yep. And it seems natural because that is the answer for taking care of.
In their world of how they have had to cope and manage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've had to become dominant because there's no one there to depend upon, to provide for. Now, this can lead to the making of a bully, but it doesn't always. See, it takes a little bit more defendedness for this to unfold. So quite often, a child who's dominant also needs an encounter with a bully to become a bully. You see, once they lose their feelings, once they realize other people don't care about them, they stop caring about others. Then they lose their feelings around responsibility and caring.
And that's where we see bullying emerge.
Yes. Then they start to exploit the weak and the vulnerable. They take opportunity of others. And this is the formation of a bully. Now, we also sometimes get asked by parents, how can I help shield my children from bullies? So firstly, we can shield our children from bullying by our attachment to our children to matter more than their attachment to their peers.
So what we think of our child and our children matters more
Yes.
than what their friends at school think.
And we can also give our children some tools in how to respond, especially to verbal bullying. One technique that we know is we can have our children look at the foreheads. And if we look at someone's forehead, we don't read the emotions on their face and we don't respond with emotion. And the bully just gives up and goes somewhere else.
Doesn't feed their emotions.
It doesn't feed their emotions. Another way we can respond is verbally just saying the word and. So they might give us an insult or criticism and then we can respond back with and then they've got to come up with another trick or another put down, another shame, another humiliation, and then we just say and again. And it just runs out and the bully just gives up in that case as well.
But perhaps we could touch on what really is the answer then for bullying. The answer, I mean, we hear a lot about bullying in most of our schools. And I think the answer that's often provided is a little different than what we might see as a solution.
Yes. So the answer that would become evident as perhaps we've been looking at this is for the child to get their feelings back, to get their feelings of caring, for them to become dependent again. So we invite them into a relationship.
So it's about an adult providing for that child, for that bully.
Yep.
It's not, I think often in our schools we talk about the children kind of, well, if we all know about compassion and empathy, then we won't have bullies.
We try and teach the child to care again.
Yeah.
Rather,
Or make the children responsible for each other.
Yeah. Yep.
When it's, as we've talked about, that hierarchy, it's a providing adult in the lives of these children.
Yeah. Just want to touch here on dominance in adulthood. What does it look like when the dominant child becomes a dominant adult? Now, just like for the child, these instincts to dominate seem self-evident to the adult because of their past pain that they carry. But unlike a child, they're no longer dependent. So it's going to be very hard for them to find an answer to their emotional needs.
And I think, though, we look for it still in other adults, right? We get into relationships, friendships,
Yep.
marriage. Well, if I get married, this person will provide for my needs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yet the answer is to grow up, to become mature. So in life, they're driven by the rewards of power and control, like a dominant leader. or attention and praise like a perfectionist, rather than the genuine commitment to helping others or a calling to create. And they often build their careers around these rewards, so it's going to be very hard and challenging for them to disarm these patterns of behavior. You see, their instincts to defend and to dominate interferes with the process of growing up. The good news is an adult at any age can still change. They can still grow and find their true self. And we're going to talk about disarming shame and grieving the loss of connection, some major steps later in the session about what this might look like to continue to grow up.
But I think, again, these dominant adults are often very successful.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned, in careers, they're very driven.
So some are leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and some seem to be an answer for a need, like a pastor of a church.
Could actually be this type of
A dominant adult, rather than a providing adult.
Mm-hmm.
So last session we were talking about providing and depending. This is dominant.
And we might even call them like kind of that type A personality, right? Yeah. They're going to go, they're going to make things happen. They might be a perfectionist, so they do a great job.
Yeah.
But if they don't have caring, if they're not providing, then they can leave a big mess in their wake.
It's very hard to be in relationship with them, to
Mm-hmm.
live with them, to work with them. Now, another answer, if a child can't find attachment, they'll look to their peers. So here, peer orientation refers to children and youth looking to their peers for direction, for the sense of right or wrong, for the codes of contact, even their very identity. They become insecure in their attachment because insensitive relating of their peers. You see, the peers won't always be caring and sensitive, attuned to their needs.
Well, imagine a 7-year-old raising another 7-year-old. That's probably not going to go that well.
It's not a recipe that's going to likely come out
very well.
No.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, vulnerability here is often shamed or exploited by their peers.
Mm-hmm.
And hence, there's a profound loss of feelings and lack of maturation in these peer-orientated children. And the more the peers matter, the more the child can be hurt, the more they're prone to be bullied, and the more prone they are to then become a bully.
Mm-hmm.
Both for defensive dominance and for peer-orientated children, we can offer ourselves as the answer. Only we can do this, never their peers, not until they're grown up at least. Insecurity or codependency is really just too superficially attached. It's not less attachment that is needed. It's to become more securely attached. So we offer ourselves as the answer. Now, if we look at Scripture, we see examples of this same answer in Scripture as well. So Jesus invited his disciples to come follow him, such as in Mark 1:17. Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." So he's inviting them to become dependent as he leads, to be their answer. And Paul invites his brothers in Christ, both at Corinth and Philippi, to come follow him, as Paul followed Jesus. So in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, "Be imitators of me as I am Christ." In 1 Corinthians 4, it says, "I urge you, then be imitators of me." And in Philippians 3:17, "Brothers, join in imitating me, and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the examples you have in us." Now, by focusing on attachment rather than the outcomes of maturation, so the outcomes might be independence, separateness, individuality, rather than focusing on these things, which is perhaps the long-term goal that we hope for, if we focus on attachment, these things naturally unfold. So, for example, if we focus on inviting dependence, then independence will come forth. If we provide a home base, this encourages a venturing forth. If we fulfill the need for togetherness, this primes separateness. And when we cultivate a strong attachment, this gives birth to individuality. You see, children don't need to separate in order to grow up, but rather to have deeper attachments for maturation to result.
And so when these conditions are all there, it just naturally unfolds.
Yeah. So this hopefully gives us an idea of where we want to aim. Now, we've been talking over these past 2 sessions about attachment. So I just want to bring together some conclusions about attachment. And we've touched on most of these before, but I'm just putting them all in one place for us. Every child needs an adult to invite them into dependence. Then they won't need to be dominant. Every child needs unconditional invitation to exist in our presence, to come to rest. That's emotional rest. To soften their hearts.
The more immature or defended the child, the greater the need of attachments in order to function. And a child cannot become too attached, only too superficially or insecurely attached, or perhaps attached in the dominant mode.
And independence should not be pushed. Instead, all growth emanates from a place of rest. That's rest from the work of attachment. It's a deep and secure emotional attachment that is needed. This now concludes our work looking at development and defendedness and attachment, looking at our children from different perspectives, so we can understand and restore our intuition. For the rest of this session, we want to look at some practical applications of what we've been learning, just to wrap up this series on parenting. We want to start with, how do we work with the attachment? How do we foster it? How does it come forth? Well, first, we want to work with attachment by collecting our child, by initiating the connection. So we can collect our children by collecting their eyes, perhaps a smile from them and a nod. And we do this just to test the working relationship, to warm it up, to provide some connection. And we do this before we give directions, or for no other reason than just to build a relationship. And so there are many ways we can do this collecting. Perhaps if you have a shy child or a gaze avoidant child, you'll need to use those questions to collect their ears. If it's a child that's dominant, in this case, you might ask them for help. And then at some point, we provide a gift. And we do this quite naturally in society by giving a handshake or a hug, something for them to hold on to you. If it's a parting, perhaps to school, you might put something in their lunchbox, or you'll give them something to hold on to. Perhaps a meet-up time or an activity at the end of school, something to look forward to. Now, we also want to continue inviting the attachment. And so we've just got a few ideas here of how that might happen, but there's many ways that this could unfold.
Perhaps if your child is a teenager, maybe they have some friends over for time to play and hang out together, and a way that you can provide for them is, give them a lot of food to eat. You provide a space for them to be in a friendly and a safe way.
We also want to maintain the attachment, and we do this by bridging what could divide, what separation that we could face. You see, when facing separation, we want to preserve the connection by drawing attention to what stays the same, or the next point of contact. Here we have a bridge, and if we look across the bridge, we can see what's on the other side. We're not seeing the separation that the bridge is going across. So we want to do that with our children. We want to bridge the separation. So the separation could be things like problem behaviors, or any disciplines that we need to use, any results of rules and limits that they encounter, faults or shortcomings when things don't go right, or any defensive detachments. We want to bridge over these things and draw attention to what's next.
Even just bridging time that we're separated, even going to school or going away for a few days. How do we focus on what the relationship is like when we connect again?
Yeah. Now, traditionally, we have the goodbye ritual, a ritual around this. So in social settings, we used to say something like, "May God be with you until we meet again." But for our children, we might say something more like, "After school, we'll go to the playground together." So we're drawing attention to what's happening after the separation.
I notice our children do this quite naturally with their friends. So say we get together with friends, they have a great time playing together, they don't want to leave, but they have to. And they'll say, when can we play again? When's the next time? Are you going to come to my house? Can I come back? They're looking for that next point when they're going to connect.
Mm-hmm. So in all of these things, before we address problem behavior or separation or faults or shortcomings, or even a conflict, if we're having a conflict, talk about what the outcome is. When do we connect again? Once you do that, then it's easier to address what separates. Easier to address what you're sad about, what's not working, what you're fighting over, what you're frustrated about.
Well, you're not worried about the relationship.
No.
You're not worried, oh, are we still going to be friends if we're having this argument right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Remember we heard a story about a couple who was married, and when they argued, the wife was so fearful to engage in an argument or conflict because the example she had seen was whenever there was an argument between parents, her mom left. Like it was the end of the relationship. So you couldn't even have conflict because there was no bridge.
Mm-hmm.
It was the end of the relationship.
Yeah. So in this case, would it be good then to bridge?
Yeah, we're going to make it through this. We'll be okay. And here's this issue I need to talk to you about.
Yes.
That's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We also want to act as the child's matchmaker. Here, we use existing working attachments, our attachment to the child, to introduce them to new people. So we take the lead in the introduction. We endear the two parties to each other, drawing attention to what's in common. We create situations such as rituals and traditions, such as holidays, celebrations, meals, gatherings. And we facilitate the caregiving. We prime the dependent provider instincts.
And I think this idea of matchmaking is really important with other caregivers of our children, say daycare or school, really working the attachment between the two.
Mm-hmm. Now that we've looked at connection, how to build, create, and maintain connection, we want to also look at maturation. How do we prime maturation? You see, we can't make maturation happen, but at least we can make it conducive for maturation to unfold. So the first idea we have here is soliciting good intentions. See here, we want to get the child to aim in the right direction. Sometimes we think intentions are not good enough, that only behavior is acceptable. But from a developmental viewpoint, good intentions are like gold. Intentions are the seeds of values. They're the precursor to a sense of responsibility. In essence, it comes from inside the child. The child wants to do something. They may not get there yet, but it's coming from inside rather than from outside.
So you can say things like, can I count on you to put away your dishes after you eat? Or are you willing to give it a try, making your bed today? Can you work on that? Do you think you can handle it? Or will you try and remember? Ways that we can kind of work at them finding their own desires.
Yeah. And we can do this instead of using consequences. We can do this to set them up for success. Now, we're not saying that soliciting good intentions is always going to automatically result in our desired behavior. They might not be able to follow through. But the child's starting somewhere, and we're aiming in the right direction. And that's a good place to begin. Now, another way we can invite maturation is by allowing the tempering emotions, by allowing the processing of those emotions. So we want to work in context of good attachment. We want to build the connection first. And we also want to wait till the intensity is subsided because we know big emotions are hard to process. We want to resist the temptation in the moment to confront. And then we also want to find the tempering emotions or the memory inside the child, inviting them to feel on the other hand. Some examples are, do you have some hits in you? And then also to ask, do you have some hugs in you as well? Now, we have something that we do as a ritual in our family called the examine.
So the examine is where usually at the end of the day, as a family, we'll ask questions of what are you most grateful for from today? What moment of the day? And we'll take turns sharing that individually. And then what moment are you least grateful for? Or another way to look at it, kind of what was the high of the day or the low of the day? And it's a way to really prime this mixing of emotions and to see spiritually, to see where God's been at work, where is his presence. But to say, this is the thing I'm most thankful for, and here's what I'm least thankful for. And then separately, we recognize them, and then you can start to mix them.
Yeah. So once we affirm them separately, capitalize on those feelings of good to draw out the attention the opposite.
This doesn't have to be a formal process. Lately, it's been our son saying at the dinner table, how's been your day, to each of us in the family? You know, not maybe as reflective as it could be, but it's been his way of checking in with us. And what are the good things? What are the bad things? How are we all doing?
Yeah. So this helps the child find their tempering elements that will be the answer to the troubling impulses in them. One more thing we can do is engage the tears. And we've talked about the tears around frustration and futility. Now, when the tears are stuck, we want to work in reverse order. So we start to touch on the sadness ever so gently and indirectly until the softening starts to occur.
Do you have an example of that?
So, for example, touching on something that didn't work. Maybe the friend didn't come and play today. Can you hand me the potatoes, please? You just touch on it and come back to it.
You don't dive into the really painful moment.
We don't. So we think of the painful moment, the hard emotions to process, as like a wound. And we don't stick our fingers in the wound and dig around to see if we can fix something. We just touch on it ever so gently so it can heal itself. Now, another way to invite maturation is by creating a yes environment. You see, our brains don't know how to move forward with no's. There's little information as to what we can do, how to solve the problem, what is allowed. And so it can be quite confusing and frustrating. So we want to create a yes environment that supports creativity and exploration.
Of course, this doesn't mean we never say no, because that could look very permissive or like the kids get to do whatever they want. Of course, we have to put boundaries around things, but this type of environment really allows our children to be able to emerge and to explore.
Yeah, because quite often we say, no, you can't put the blocks in the sandbox, or you can't have another snack now, or no, you can't use your elbow as a paintbrush.
Why not?
Why not? We come up with all these rules, but it stops and inhibits the child from moving forward. Sometimes we say things like, don't spill the milk. And so they'll have to spill the milk to figure out how the instruction that you're telling them not to do happens. Like, okay, I've got to figure out all the ways I can spill the milk to figure out what not to do so I can do them and not spill the milk.
So if what we're hoping for is the milk not to go all over the floor, we might say, well, can you hold your bowl with 2 hands as you walk across to the table, for example? That actually tells my brain, oh, this is what I can do, what I should do.
And sometimes we have rules which are well-meaning, but also put ideas into the child's head. So, for example, a rule in classroom in grade 1 that says no dancing on the tables.
Oh, I could dance on the tables.
Did you know that was a thing?
Maybe I should try that.
Yeah. So providing a way forward while providing clarity is what is and isn't acceptable allows the child space they need.
So, for example, your teenager who's just gotten their learner's license wants to start driving the car. So you might say, yes, you can start driving. However, first we'll have to come to a driving agreement. And each time, for example, you violate it, maybe you'll lose the driving privilege for a certain amount of time. Now, this is much more likely to motivate your teen to drive safely than trying to keep them from driving or by constant lecturing. It's not going to create the environment that will help them to grow.
Now, this can be quite challenging because we're maybe very used to saying no, and you might not trust that if you create a yes environment that this will actually work. You might feel very permissive. So this is quite often a challenge for parents because we haven't been raised this way. I certainly wasn't raised with a yes environment.
But you tried this with our kids, didn't you?
I did.
How did that go?
We had a lot of fun. We had like a whole day where I had to say yes to everything. And it was quite challenging. And it's really opened my eyes to why I say no to things.
Why is that?
Because I just want it my way.
Mm.
I'm not actually prepared to be moved and provide for the children.
In the way that they're desiring.
They're asking for permission to explore their world, to investigate, to have creativity. And I'm really saying no to that because it's messy.
I don't want to clean it up, so no.
Pretty much. So it really opened my eyes by engaging in this. Now we want to move on to some emotions of guilt, shame, and anger. And this really is an opportunity for us as parents to grow up, to look at how we respond. Now, guilt, shame, and anger are all very difficult emotions to experience. And we act out in all sorts of ways, often without even knowing it. For example, if we perceive it's somebody else's fault, we're going to feel angry and we want to punish somebody. If we think it's our fault, then we feel guilty and we want to make things better or undo what is wrong. If there's something wrong with me, we feel shame. We want to hide and get rid of it or defend oneself.
And all of these revolve around frustration. Our thoughts get a hold of frustration and say it has to be someone's fault. And that's really where these emotions come from.
Yeah. So we're going to look at these individually and see perhaps how we can engage with them. So when we feel responsible for something not working, this guilt moves us to step up as the provider to make things better. But in our guilt-phobic society, we avoid responsibility so as not to feel guilty. Guilty is a really hard emotion. We don't want to feel guilty. So we stop providing for our children and we make the children responsible for themselves. But instead, if we disclose our grief to our supporting cast, we can feel our own sadness over the loss, over the things that cannot change, things that didn't work. And we come to terms that we can't make this better, and it's our responsibility to try again.
What about, like, I'm just thinking of a situation, say your marriage has ended. There could be a lot of guilt for a parent around that this relationship didn't work.
Yeah.
And so finding, as we've said, disclosing the grief. So the grief of the broken relationship and sharing that, we've said, with our supporting cast. What might that look like?
So our supporting cast is not our children, it's other adults in our life. Other people that are there and can listen, validate what we're feeling.
Support, obviously.
Support, yeah. And just allow the emotions. Allow space for that. If you need tears, to have those tears. If you're angry or frustrated, just to allow that. Those feelings to be there.
Now, this might actually be like a formal support group, right? We can have support groups over lots of different things. But this is also something that you can create yourself.
Yeah.
Find those friends. It doesn't have to be a big group. Find those relationships. Maybe there's even like a mentor or a spiritual director or someone that's part of that cast that is there for your support.
Yeah. And as we have our own feelings being supported and validated, this allows us then to make space for the child's sadness.
Right.
Now, another area that we trip up on is falling short of our values, ideals, and intentions. Here we feel guilty because we've fallen short of our values. And we feel the gap between what we desire and what we can accomplish or what we've accomplished. And in this moment, we can disclose with the child, I don't agree with myself. That's not at all what I intended to do. Can we have a redo here?
So, for example, you got angry, blew up, yelled at the kids.
You realize later, that's not what I wanted to do. That's not how I wanted to respond to this. And then we do it over again. We do a redo. This allows us to make space for the child's anger then, for their frustration. And we do this, of course, without making the child responsible.
But we're not just striving for perfection.
We're not. We all make mistakes. And that's part of life. That's about how we grow, how we learn, how we move forward. Now, sometimes we become stuck because of a feeling of shame. You see, shame is an emotion like all of the emotions. It's neither good nor bad. You see, feeling a little shame situationally can remind us not to stray outside the relationship boundaries, not to do awful things, all to keep us connected and make us easy to fit into society, fit into our relationships. So another name for this healthy shame that we're talking about is conscience. Here we feel bad for not being easy to take care of, or for being too much trouble. We feel badly for not listening or for not obeying, for not deferring or following. Our conscience is productive when it moves us to be easy to take care of. Guilt is useful for the adult. It moves us to provide for those who are responsible for. So both of these together result in a fulfilling relationship.
But we can become stuck in shame, and that's when it's no longer productive for us.
Mm-hmm. So hiding our shame is what gives it power over us. This stuck shame is unusual in that it never dissipates like most other emotions do. And it eventually corrupts our image of ourselves, making it more difficult to engage than guilt or anger.
So under a lot of what might look like outward behaviors, like addiction or aggression, often underneath that are feelings of shame.
Yeah. Keeps us stuck in that place. Yeah. So then how do we disarm the shame? So first we feel and recognize that shame's moving us, and then we need to reframe it. So rather than saying, I am such a failure, we transpose that to I felt embarrassed. I felt incompetent. This might seem unnatural at first, but what we're doing over time is we're taking the sting out of it. We're moving it from our identity to just something that we're feeling.
I've also heard it described as kind of the difference between a state and a trait. One way we might be able to think about it, like the state is temporary. A trait is, well, that's just who I am, right? I'm just a failure. But if I feel like I failed in that moment, that's just a part of who I am. It doesn't define my whole being.
And over time, if we share it as I felt, as just a momentary thing, then we feel other things as well. And then as we feel that, we can have some sadness and tears about any separation we faced. So then we have an adaptation, is our path to putting shame back in its proper place. You see, with adaptation, we know that others have hurt us out of their own ignorance, out of their own pain and confusion. So rather than reacting to separation and other people's shame and hurt,
it's not that there was something wrong with me.
No, that they themselves have been hurt, and this is how they're responding. So this journey of disarming shame is the true source of humility and compassion, tenderness for ourselves and others. And it's the loneliest journey that we ever take. If we find ourselves grumpy or frustrated, the best thing to do is verbalize it and have a grumpy day. See, if you can temper the frustration, it can be really helpful to move us to get things done or to change things. Sometimes the things we can't change, so we'll have our tears about that as well. But in all of this, for grumpiness and anger, by allowing it, by having a grumpy day, it helps us to move forward and not get stuck by it. Now, the final thing we can do as the parents, as the providers, is build a village for the child. You see, an attachment village is a network of relationships in which the child matures and develops. It develops a sense of rootedness, belonging, and connection. So as the primary caregivers, it's our responsibility to create a village for the child and our own supporting cast.
So building a village is something we do for the child.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily a group of adult friends that I like to hang out with. Yeah. It's the adults, could be family, could be extended family or other adults in our community who we match up with the child to be part of their support and their maturity.
Yep. And we need to do this because many of our cultures today don't provide this naturally for us. So this is something that we need to do. And what makes it all work is that the child accepts the adults in their life as a substitute compass point from us and feels at home with these other people as well.
And I think it's especially important as our children get older, like in the teenage years when they are naturally needing separation from us as the parent. Well, who are the other adults who are part of their village that, it might be the auntie or the coach or the friend, adult friend who is the one who can speak into their life in a different way during some of those years as they need to find out who they are apart from us.
Yeah. So looking to our adult friends, other families that we connect with, who is interested in our children, who can be there for them as that coach, that provider, that place that they can go to in addition to us. Thanks for joining us in this series, and we trust that you've learnt lots from this, and we look forward to sharing more with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.